400,000 people, 400,000 French nationals alone scattered across the Middle East, suddenly facing the same quiet reality at the same time. The airplanes are disappearing. Think about that number for a moment. 400,000, that is roughly the population of a large European city. And those people are not tourists on holiday. Many of them live there, work there, raise families there. Entire lives built across countries like the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Oman. And now, those lives are paused because the airplanes are gone. Commercial aviation across the region has largely stopped operating. Airlines that once ran dozens of daily routes into the Middle East have suspended service. Insurance restrictions, safety concerns, risk calculations made in quiet boardrooms thousands of miles away, and the result is simple. People who expected to leave on a routine commercial flight suddenly cannot. Let me walk you through what happened. European governments are now carrying out what may become one of the largest civilian evacuation efforts in modern history. The numbers alone are staggering. France estimates around 400,000 of its citizens are currently in the Middle East and may require evacuation assistance. Germany reports roughly 30,000 German nationals in the region. Italy says 58,000 Italians are there. Spain, the United Kingdom, and several other European countries have thousands more citizens spread across the same area. Add those numbers together and the scale becomes clear. Hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands. Now imagine trying to move that many people out of a region where commercial aviation has almost completely shut down. Pause for a second, because this is where the situation becomes difficult to grasp. Normally, when travelers leave the Middle East, they do it through one of the busiest aviation networks on Earth. Airports in cities like Dubai, Doha, and Abu Dhabi function as global crossroads, planes arriving and departing every few minutes. But when airlines suspend service, that system collapses almost instantly. Flights vanish from schedules, routes disappear, seats that once numbered in the tens of thousands per day shrink to a tiny fraction. And the few remaining flights that still operate, they cost extraordinary amounts of money. Prices that many stranded travelers simply cannot afford. So governments across Europe have stepped in. The United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, Germany. Each has begun chartering emergency flights. Special aircraft organized directly by the state sent into the region specifically to retrieve their citizens. Picture the scene for a moment. Somewhere in Europe, coordination rooms are operating around the clock. Officials reviewing passenger lists, tracking locations, contacting embassies, identifying which airports are still usable, which air routes remain safe, because sending a plane into a region experiencing instability is not as simple as booking a flight. Every aircraft must be insured, every route must be approved, every airport must be confirmed as operational. And then there is the most basic question of all. Where are the people? European citizens across the Middle East are not concentrated in one place. They are spread across multiple countries, across cities, across industries. Energy workers in the Gulf, finance professionals in global banking centers, engineers, consultants, teachers, families, a vast expatriate population built over decades, and suddenly governments are trying to locate them, count them, and decide who leaves first. Consider that challenge. Who goes on the first flight? Who waits? Who might wait days or weeks? Because here's the reality that officials are now quietly acknowledging. The available airlift capacity is nowhere near large enough to move everyone quickly, not even close. Chartered flights can evacuate hundreds at a time, but when you are dealing with numbers approaching 500,000 people, the timeline stretches. Days turn into weeks. Weeks may turn into months. Let that sink in. This is not an overnight evacuation. This is an operation that could unfold slowly, flight by flight, passenger list by passenger list. And while that process begins, life continues in the region itself. Many of the European nationals currently stranded are located in countries that are not directly participating in the conflict: the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, countries that host large foreign populations and major international businesses. But geography matters. Because even if those nations are not direct participants in military activity, they sit within range of Iranian missile capabilities or other potential combat operations. That proximity changes how governments evaluate risk. It changes how airlines evaluate risk. And when airlines change their calculations, the planes stop flying. Here's a thought worth sitting with. Distance does not erase danger. Sometimes it simply places people close enough to worry. That is the position many European nationals now find themselves in, close enough to uncertainty, not necessarily an immediate danger, but close enough that governments are preparing for the worst. At the same time, not everyone is choosing to leave. Some people are staying where they are. Essential workers who cannot abandon their posts, families with deep roots in the region, others who simply believe the danger remains manageable. Because when you live somewhere long enough, evacuation is not just a logistical decision, it is a life decision. Leaving means abandoning homes, jobs, communities, routines. Staying means accepting uncertainty. And so across the Middle East right now, thousands of European nationals are making that choice quietly. Stay or go. Meanwhile, Gulf governments hosting these large expatriate communities have delivered a consistent message to foreign residents. Remain calm. Authorities in those countries have assured expatriates that their safety remains a priority and that there is no reason for panic. But European governments are still preparing evacuation plans anyway. Think about the meaning behind that. When governments begin organizing flights capable of moving tens of thousands of their own citizens, it signals something deeper than routine precaution. And that deeper meaning is what makes this story so significant. Because evacuations of this scale do not happen casually. They happen when governments begin preparing for possibilities they are not yet discussing publicly, which raises a question, a quiet one. What exactly are they preparing for, and why move so many people now? Now, here is the question that hangs over everything. How do you move hundreds of thousands of people when the skies are nearly empty? Think about the scale again for a moment. France alone estimates around 400,000 of its citizens are currently in the Middle East and may require evacuation assistance. Germany says 30,000 Germans are there. Italy reports 58,000 Italians. Add in citizens from Spain, the United Kingdom, and other European nations, and the total number stretches even higher. Hundreds of thousands of people. But the aircraft available to move them? A fraction of what would normally be required, and that is where the logistical puzzle begins. Let me walk you through the mechanics of this. A standard passenger aircraft used for evacuation flights might carry 200 people, maybe 300 if configured tightly. Now imagine trying to move hundreds of thousands of passengers using aircraft that can only carry a few hundred at a time. Even if dozens of planes operate daily, the math stretches out quickly. Hundreds per flight. Hundreds of flights, days turning into weeks, weeks possibly stretching into months. That is the quiet reality officials are now facing. Because even though governments have chartered emergency flights, the capacity simply does not match the scale of the population. Picture this for a moment. A European citizen working in the Gulf region opens an email from their embassy. It contains instructions. Register your location, confirm your passport details, wait for further notice. Then they wait, not knowing when their flight might come. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe much later. Now multiply that moment by hundreds of thousands of people across multiple countries. That is the situation unfolding right now. European governments have established coordination centers to handle the flow of information. These centers collect data from embassies, companies, and individual citizens trying to report where they are and whether they wish to leave. Every name must be recorded, every location confirmed, because evacuation flights cannot depart half empty. Each aircraft must be filled with passengers who can reach the airport quickly and safely. And that creates another challenge: distance. European nationals in the Middle East are not clustered neatly around a few airports. They are spread across cities, business districts, industrial zones, offshore energy operations, and residential communities. Some people live hours away from the nearest major airport. Others work on installations connected to the energy industry, where travel requires multiple stages just to reach a commercial terminal. Now imagine receiving notice that your evacuation flight departs in 6 hours. You must gather your documents, pack what you can carry, arrange transportation, reach the airport, pass security, and board, all inside a shrinking window of time. Consider that pressure. Because when evacuation flights are scarce, every seat matters. Missing one departure may mean waiting for the next opportunity, and whenever that appears. And remember something else. Many European nationals in the region are not temporary visitors. They are expatriates, professionals who move to the Middle East for work in energy companies, banks, engineering firms, and international businesses. Some have lived there for years. Their homes are there. Their children's schools are there. Their daily lives are deeply connected to the communities around them. Evacuation in that context becomes far more complicated than simply boarding a flight. People must decide what to take, what to leave behind, what parts of their lives can be packed into a single suitcase, and what must remain where it is. A quiet line comes to mind here. Leaving is never just about distance. Sometimes leaving means stepping away from the life you built. Now, here is where another dimension of the story appears. Not everyone wants to leave. Some European nationals have chosen to remain where they are despite the evacuation options. There are several reasons. Essential workers whose jobs are critical to industries operating in the region. Families who feel secure in the countries where they live. Individuals who believe the level of danger does not justify abandoning their homes. And governments hosting these expatriate populations have also spoken directly to that concern. Countries across the Gulf have reassured foreign residents that safety remains a priority. Officials in those nations have urged expatriates not to panic and to continue daily life as normally as possible. Listen carefully to that message. Remain calm. Continue life as normal. But at the same time, European governments are preparing evacuation flights. Two signals moving at the same time, reassurance on one side, preparation on the other. Let that sink in, because it reveals how complex the situation has become. On the ground, many cities remain operational. Offices open, businesses running, airports functioning in limited capacity. But above that everyday activity, governments are preparing for a scenario that might change everything. And those preparations involve aircraft, especially chartered planes, flights that did not exist on schedules a week ago, planes dispatched by governments to retrieve their citizens. Each flight carrying passengers who may not know when they will return, or if they will. And as those planes begin to depart, another challenge emerges. Where do they land? Most evacuation flights are returning citizens to Europe, but airports receiving those passengers must process large numbers of arrivals quickly. Immigration services, transportation networks, emergency planning for people who may arrive with little notice and uncertain plans. Evacuations do not end when the plane lands. They continue on the ground. Families reconnect, employers adjust, governments track who has returned and who remains abroad. Meanwhile, the evacuation lists continue growing because new registrations arrive every day from citizens asking to be included in the process. Each name another data point, another seat that must eventually be found. And throughout this operation, officials keep returning to the same calculation: capacity, aircraft capacity, airport capacity, time. Time measured not in months or years, but in flights. One plane leaves, another arrives. Passenger lists are updated, new departures scheduled, but the numbers remain vast. Hundreds of thousands, and only so many seats available each day. Think about that tension for a moment. Every government involved understands the same truth. The faster the evacuation, the safer their citizens become. But speed depends on aircraft. Aircraft depend on safety conditions. And safety conditions depend on a region that has suddenly become unpredictable, which means every decision about evacuation flights is made against a backdrop of uncertainty. A line often repeated in crisis planning comes to mind. Preparation begins where certainty ends. And right now, certainty is in short supply because as evacuation flights begin carrying passengers out of the Middle East, the broader meaning of this operation is becoming impossible to ignore. When multiple governments coordinate the removal of hundreds of thousands of their citizens from a region, it sends a message, not necessarily about what is happening today, but about what might happen tomorrow. And that raises the question that sits quietly behind every chartered flight leaving the region. If this evacuation is preparation, preparation for what? 400,000 French nationals, 30,000 Germans, 58,000 Italians, thousands more from Spain, the United Kingdom, and other European countries. Hundreds of thousands of people spread across a region where commercial flights have largely disappeared. Now pause for a moment, because by the time evacuation numbers reach this scale, the operation stops being just transportation. It becomes something else entirely, a signal, not shouted, not announced, but unmistakable. Let me explain what that means. When governments organize evacuation flights for a handful of citizens, it is routine crisis management. An embassy helps a few travelers leave after unrest, natural disaster, or political instability. But when governments begin organizing aircraft for hundreds of thousands of people, the calculation changes. That scale requires coordination at the highest levels. Foreign ministries, defense planners, airspace authorities, embassies, airlines, insurance companies, every piece of the aviation system suddenly involved in one task, getting citizens out. And that is exactly what European governments have begun doing. Flights chartered, passenger lists assembled, coordination centers running around the clock. But here is something important to hold on to. Evacuation does not happen overnight. Even under ideal conditions, the process unfolds slowly, one aircraft at a time, 200 passengers here, 300 there, another plane departing the next morning. Then another. The rhythm becomes steady, but gradual. And while that process unfolds, hundreds of thousands of European nationals remain where they are, in offices, apartments, work sites, schools, cities that still look normal on the surface. Picture that moment. Morning commutes still happening, restaurants still serving lunch, meetings still taking place in glass office towers, and yet at the same time, embassies are quietly compiling evacuation lists. Two realities existing side by side, daily life and contingency planning. Let that sink in, because the contrast tells you something about how governments approach risk. They do not wait for the worst moment to begin preparations. They begin when the possibility of that moment becomes real enough to plan for. Across the Middle East, many of the European nationals affected by this evacuation effort live in Gulf states with large expatriate communities: the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman. Countries that have built global economies partly powered by foreign professionals, energy specialists, financial analysts, engineers, consultants, entire international communities that have grown over decades. And those governments have made clear statements to reassure foreign residents. They have told expatriates that their safety remains a priority. They have urged calm. They have asked residents not to panic. That reassurance matters. But European governments are still moving planes into position. Two messages, once again, moving together: reassurance, preparation. Think about what that combination means, because evacuation planning is never simple. Every flight requires coordination: airspace permissions, aircraft availability, ground crews, passenger security processing, fuel, crew scheduling, landing slots, all of it synchronized across multiple countries. And that complexity multiplies when several European nations conduct evacuations at the same time. The United Kingdom organizing flights for British citizens, Spain arranging aircraft for Spanish nationals, Italy working to move tens of thousands of Italians, Germany coordinating its own departures, each government responsible for its citizens, yet all operating in the same crowded airspace. Imagine that coordination. Multiple nations, multiple passenger lists, aircraft arriving and departing across a region where commercial aviation has already been disrupted. Every departure carefully planned, every arrival monitored, because even one unexpected change, a closed runway, an insurance restriction, a sudden shift in security conditions, can ripple through the entire evacuation schedule. That is why officials repeatedly return to the same phrase: this will take time, weeks, possibly months. Those words are not dramatic, they are logistical. Because when numbers reach the scale now being discussed, no evacuation can move instantly. Even the largest aircraft fleets cannot carry 500,000 people overnight. And yet the flights continue, slowly, steadily, one departure at a time. Passengers boarding with carry-on luggage, passport in hand, uncertainty about what comes next. Some travelers leaving homes they may soon return to, others leaving without knowing when that return might happen. Because evacuation carries a strange emotional weight: relief at getting on the plane, and at the same time, a quiet question: what happens after we leave? That moment is deeply human. It is not just a logistical movement of people, it is a turning point in individual lives, a line between before and after. A simple sentence captures it well. Sometimes the journey begins when the ground shifts. For hundreds of thousands of European nationals across the Middle East, that shift is happening now. Not through explosions or sudden violence in their neighborhoods, but through the disappearance of flights, the emails from embassies, the registration forms, the waiting lists, the chartered planes. each step part of a process designed to move people away from uncertainty before it arrives. And that final point is perhaps the most important one. Mass evacuations do not only respond to events that have already happened, they prepare for events that might. European governments have not publicly described worst-case scenarios connected to this evacuation effort. But the scale of the operation speaks for itself. Hundreds of thousands of citizens, flights organized across multiple nations, weeks or months of planning ahead, all of it unfolding quietly, flight by flight. And as those aircraft depart the region carrying passengers back to Europe, the meaning behind the operation becomes clearer. Evacuation on this scale is not simply movement, it is precaution. It is preparation. It is governments looking at a map, looking at their citizens, and deciding that the safest place for them might soon be somewhere else. And so the planes continue to fly, one aircraft at a time, 200 passengers here, 300 there, hundreds of thousands still waiting. The largest civilian evacuation effort in modern European memory slowly unfolding in the background of daily life. No dramatic announcements, no single defining moment, just a steady stream of departures, carrying people away from uncertainty, and leaving behind one quiet question that only time will answer. What happens next?